J'avais dit que j'allais plus faire de critiques à la va-vite, mais finalement la semaine dernière je suis allé à l'avant-première de The Deep House et il y avait tellement de trucs intéressants à dire que finalement, me voilà.
I trusted you. Bullshit! Every single thing you told me was a lie!
No! God, please, no!
Et ça va être le moment où finalement j'arrête de parler français parce que quand j'étais en train de rentrer en fait de l'avant-première du cinéma, j'ai commencé à écrire le script tout de suite de cette vidéo et c'est sorti en anglais. Plutôt que tout traduire, on va faire certaines parties en français, certaines parties en anglais. Vous êtes d'accord? Parce que c'est plus facile pour moi.
On s'en bat les couilles, on s'en bat les couilles, on s'en bat les couilles.
So I was at the premiere last Thursday of The Deep House, and the directors came at the very end with the main actress as well, and we had a little tiny Q&A, and we managed to deconstruct their film in a couple of interesting ways, and I wanted to share this information with you because I thought it was that kind of exclusive thing that we don't usually get to know unless we go through a lot of different articles written about a specific film. So The Deep House has been directed by Julien Maury and Alexandre Bustillo, and the actress that was there was Camille Rowe. I was actually quite shocked to find out they directed 6 long features together, and among those ones there was one that I actually knew and that it was on my watch list for quite some time, which is called Inside, or in French À l'intérieur, and it's one of the most acclaimed new French extremity horror films. Also, I was really surprised to find out that they were behind the most recent addition to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise with Leatherface, which is a prequel to the original film that I didn't really want to see, mostly because I was so completely burned out by the remake. I think it came out in like 2004 or something like that, of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I just completely abandoned any kind of hope that any kind of sequel or sidequel could be good or even at the same level of the original. While I was researching the film, I felt really dumb because this is all stuff that I didn't know as I was entering the premiere. I went there completely not knowing anything about the film. I didn't watch any of the trailers. I just thought that the posters looked fun and interesting, and I really liked the premise of the film. And I like when things like that happen and you just go with a complete blank slate when it comes to the film you're about to watch, and then you get almost always pleasantly surprised. And it was the case for The Deep House. The other 2 films that they made are Les Vides and Aux Yeux des Vivants. And I really like the fact that their career is kind of a hybrid career. It reminds me a lot of the career of Alexandre Aja or even Xavier Jean. So it's those French directors that are trying to go to the States and make different films and then bring them back to France and pretend basically to be American filmmakers even though they're not. But it's really funny because even if you look through the Wikipedia pages of the directors, the French language option, it's not even there. So like if you're trying to pretend to be American, it's going really well. I think you fooled even the internet. Well done.
Your ideas, they are more new. Maybe they're better. Now you are here, and maybe we feel we have to work harder, make more money.
And they talked about specifically the fact that if you want to make a horror film, if English is the main language, then it will be easier to sell it at the film market. And same goes with French audiences as well. I don't know why there is this weird despise for horror films that are French, and the French audiences don't tend to take them seriously. So in a weird way, just because of the language, French audiences will go and see it because they will think that it's American, that it's anything but a French film.
What a jerk!
Let's finally talk about the film, and I will try to keep it as spoiler-free as possible as the film is actually coming out in theaters today. So I want to try and convince you to go and see it. Why not? Oh shit, and I forgot that Camille Rowe was there as well during the premiere. Her full name is actually Camille Christelle Porchorès. Et je comprends tout à fait pourquoi elle a décidé de se faire appeler Rowe, parce que c'est beaucoup plus facile à dire. She's a model and she's had quite an impressive career, and she's made a lot of different fashion covers across the years. C'était l'égérie de la marque Etam, c'était l'égérie de la marque Princesse Tam Tam et l'égérie de la marque X aussi. And she has a couple of really small acting roles, but nothing worth remembering at this point. But nothing to do with her performance. I actually thought that in The Deep House she was actually quite good. And if you want to compare to someone else, I'd probably compare her performance to Cara Delevingne. So if you like Cara Delevingne's performance and attitude, I think you will definitely like Camille in this film.
Do we have a plaster I can put on my face, please? Oh, my vagina!
When you think about underwater horror films, it's actually a very, very, very niche market. Especially if you try to look for films which play with the haunted mansion kind of genre and the underwater genre at the same time. Very often you've got films like Underwater, you've got films like Cold Skin, The Bay. So basically the villains of these films are underwater creatures, or you've got other water-based horror subgenres which just star animals. If you think about Jaws, if you think about The Shallows, if you think about Piranha 3D and all of those kind of films, I really fell in love with the cinematography. It was so beautiful. The production design is insane, and I will actually go into details later on with some fun anecdotes that directors gave to us during the screening. The sound design is really amazing, and everything was actually done in post-production. Same goes with the dialogues. That's something that they told us during the Q&A. There are actually some scenes that really reminded me of Guillermo del Toro's Shape of Water, which is an insane good compliment for a film like this. I really liked how they perfectly embraced the found footage genre and the traditional genre also, taking the best things from one and the other, and same goes with the underwater and same goes with the haunting subgenre, and they put all of these things together and made something that felt quite original. I found that the film was extremely claustrophobic, mostly because imagine the feeling of being in a haunted house, even more of being in a haunted house that you cannot escape, then add water to the mix and having a very limited amount of oxygen with you and having to try to escape. The scares are actually pretty genuine. There are a couple of jump scares which were okay, and they didn't feel cheap at all because I feel like they really used the underwater element to make sure that it felt natural. There are a lot of things that work really well. For example, when the actors start panicking and you start seeing bubbles of oxygen going everywhere on the screen, and the editing starts going all over the place, but it doesn't look rushed. It doesn't look like a weird found footage film that you don't understand what is happening. It feels very natural. It feels almost like what would happen if you were to shoot a National Geographic documentary and something went terribly wrong. That's what it feels like to watch this film.
Am I in? Yes!
Maybe a little constructive criticism that I could give to this film is that I kind of wish that the house or the mansion was even bigger than it was in the film itself, because it could have been literally a kind of a Haunting of Hill House aspect, where if you had more space, then of course the actors would have had more space to just swim around, of course, and at the same time you could have hidden sort of like ghosts in the background, and of course it would have been even more scary just because of the entire layout of the house. But I do understand why they decided to go that way. It kind of went with the realistic aspect of the film, meaning that in France there are not a lot of huge mansions like in the United States, unless you were to go with really old castles. The main flaw, I think, is that they try to explain way too many things. It's the kind of mistake that horror films tend to make a lot when it comes to haunted mansions, and especially when it comes to haunted asylums. There are a couple of weird flashbacks, or someone just stops by and gets possessed and has to explain the backstory so that we understand why the villains are doing what they're doing. But like at the end of the day, they're just ghosts, they're just evil creatures, and we don't really care why they're doing the things that they're doing.
Hi, I'm Casper. No, shh, you shouldn't do that, or you'll wake up. Too late.
Or at the very least, you could put little hints within the script, and you could leave the audience to just pick them out and try to put together. It was just spoon feeding us as much information as possible in as little time as possible, so that we could just leave the theater with no questions at all about the film, which is really sad. The actor who's playing Ben, I mean, by the very end of the film, the performance started feeling a bit off. And it might be just because that all the dialogues that are taking place underwater were actually synced afterwards. It is possible that just while they were recording all the dialogues, a couple of the dialogue lines just started feeling very clunky and cringy. And just in the third act, I don't believe anything that that person is saying, and I think it was a bit of a shame. His name is James Jagger, and he is one of Mick Jagger's sons. He has a couple of interesting credits when it comes to his filmography, so I definitely don't think that it's his fault. I think it's one of those technical mistakes that maybe got lost in the editing room. I was definitely not the only one feeling that, because in some of the most climactic moments, I heard some people laughing in the theater, and I was laughing as well.
Here's Johnny.
Just because the line delivery was so completely deadpan and weird that it started becoming almost like a weird sort of satire, even though the film wanted you to take it completely seriously. Also, some of the dialogues felt a bit off. I don't know if maybe that's because the script, the original version of the script was in French and then it was translated in English, but there are a couple of things which don't sound really good. For example, just the two partners just calling each other my love all the time. Maybe that's something that works in French, but in English you don't end every sentence by saying my love. It's just incredibly cringy. It's one of those little things that really takes you out of the narrative, and it's a bit of a shame, you know? Same goes for people calling each other baby. Just stop that. I really hate it when just in couples people call each other baby. It's something that used to be very popular like in the 90s and in the early 2000s.
Yeah, he got me before you. That doesn't make me worse than you.
And that is it when it comes to the film itself. I rated it 4 stars over 5 on Letterboxd. For me, it's still a recommendation, honestly, because I still had a really good time. And now I will give you some of the anecdotes that I was talking about before and that I managed to gather during the Q&A session. I wasn't recording the Q&A because at the beginning of the Q&A, I didn't have the idea of making this video.
Your ideas, they are more new. Maybe they're better.
I had it by the very end and while I was walking back home. So I had to basically rewrite all the anecdotes as I remember them. My question personally to the directors was what were the genre inspirations when it comes to the creation of the film? And the directors specifically cited Dario Argento's Inferno and also a film that I knew nothing about, which is called Beneath Still Waters. But they did specifically say that they were just referring to that second film mostly because of the visual influences and not the narrative influences, which makes sense because that film has really negative ratings. Here's the first interesting anecdote. It's that the director said that in France there are actually entire towns that were flooded on purpose during the creation of dams, and that you can visit them in the same way that they do it in the film. It was shot in Belgium in a big heated pool of like 30 degrees inside and outside of the water. Very often when you're shooting a film, the scenes which have a lot of water or you need to get your actors to be completely wet, they tend to get really cold really quickly because of the temperature of the water. So of course if it's not heated, it will be impossible to shoot an entire film underwater for such a long time. And I remember like even the director said that there are 2 different ways of shooting underwater. One is shooting it normally and then adding the water texture digitally later on, and the other one, which is the one that they did, was actually shooting in a huge pool. And there are only 4 or 5 big pools like this in Europe, and basically they constructed the entire house and then lowered it down, and it's this big machine that basically brings it down at the speed of 1 meter per hour. They were shooting at 6 meters of depth for the entire film, but actually the pool was 9 meters deep. The piano that you see in the film was actually in perfect conditions before it entered the water. So basically a lot of the production design was erotic in real time, which is insane. They had to go as fast as possible with a couple of scenes just because things were literally falling apart as they were rolling. And they were shooting with 4 cameras at the same time. And that's also why it was necessary for the 2 actors to be wearing GoPros at the same time, just so they could get as many angles as possible and use them in the editing room afterwards. And of course, they said that all the sound design was done in post-production, as it was literally impossible to record the sound underwater, and at the same time to have the radio system, because like the directors would always be in contact with the actors through the radio system and would actually tell them if they were perfectly in the shot or not. When it comes to the villains, so when it comes to the haunted people, they were all professional free divers, so they were working en apnée, like we would say in French. There was actually a little girl of 11 years old, and apparently they got really lucky when it came to the casting, because she didn't have to go through any kind of preparation, because it's just a hobby of her. She just enjoys working on her free diving skills in the same way that other kids would enjoy playing basketball, doing ballet, or like something like that. And I thought that was such a fun anecdote to tell you folks. Once you see the film, you'll definitely understand the context of it. So there was an alternative ending where all the bodies came afloat to the surface, but it was cut just because it felt like it was a bit too much, you know. And at the end of the day, when they gathered all the fake corpses, they were actually missing an arm. And a couple of days later, a child found it next to a river, and he was panicking and called the cops. And of course, they called even the police scientifique to test it, to make sure that it was an actual arm. And that's when they called the production, and of course the producers got a little nice slap on the hand because they scared the shit out of everyone by forgetting that prosthetic arm. So when it comes to the future career of these 2 directors, they told us during the Q&A that they signed a deal with their current producer to work on a script for a new survival horror film, but they didn't want to give us any more details, just because they told us that they're always working on so many different projects, and most of them they don't really end up being released as films. In the last few years, they signed with 8 different producers, and only 2 of those films actually ended up being made. One of them was The Deep House, and the other one is Candicia, which is coming out in a couple of weeks apparently on VOD. Normalement, je suis pas vraiment fan de balancer des anecdotes comme ça et de raconter ce genre de petits détails making-of des films, surtout parce que je pense qu'il y a des gens en France qui font déjà l'affaire et qui font déjà des trucs vraiment très cool, type le concept T'as la ref de la manie du cinéma, ou même toutes les vidéos de Clara Runway.
Une autre modélisation pour laquelle ils ont rusé, c'est celle de l'anémone de mer.
Mais quand je regardais ce film, en fait, j'étais tellement bluffé et j'étais redevenu vraiment un enfant. Je me posais tellement de questions par rapport à comment ce film il avait été tourné. Et du coup, je me suis dit, vous savez quoi, on va faire une petite vidéo un peu différente, parce que comme je dis, le jour où j'arrête de faire des vidéos un peu différentes et bizarres, il faut me shooter dans la tête, et du coup, j'essaye d'innover à chaque fois.
Hasta la vista, baby.
The Deep House is coming out tonight at the cinema. As I said before, it's a recommendation from me, especially if you take into consideration all of the things that I've told you before, and that if you manage your expectations, I think you'll definitely have a really good time. Let me know in the comments how much you loved my new haircut. And of course, that was a stupid joke. Let me know what kind of films you've been watching in the cinema lately, because I really want to know, because I've been incredibly excited to go back to the cinemas, and I'd like to know what you've been watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because it always helps. I'm Patrick, and this is Torn Apart. Get your fucking hands up, everyone is asleep, all eyes on me, away. Get your fucking hands up. I'm drowning down now. I'm drowning now. Glug 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 glug.